Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. Over the last 4.5 years that I've been doing this channel, I've collected a lot of quotes. And some of the most interesting quotes don't even come from a prophet or apostle or general authority. They've come from Sister Wendy Nelson. And especially toward the beginning of President Nelson's presidency, as she was being interviewed and sharing her experience of what it's like to be the wife of the prophet and his experience, his transition from his previous position to president of the church. And so much of what she has shared has been so enlightening and has given us a closer look at what it's like to be president of the church. We've learned a lot about revelation, at least revelation that came to President Nelson, but I'm sure it's consistent between every prophet. But ever since President Oaks became president of the church, I've been very curious to see if we would have interviews with Sister Oaks, which I knew that was going to happen, but you know, what would she say? Would she give us more insights? Would President Oaks have a similar experience? And so a little while ago, there was a church news podcast where Sheri Dew interviewed Sister Kristen M. Oaks. And this is actually over at the conference center, if I'm not mistaken, because I recognize this piece of artwork right here. I was in the conference center earlier this year. I was allowed to record inside, and this was on that top floor. And I specifically singled out this piece of artwork because it really caught my eye. I think it's really pretty. So I'm glad that they did their interview in front of it. Okay, so this is the podcast itself. If you want to watch it on YouTube, I'm going to be referring to the transcript that's on the Church News website. And I think I'll just, instead of having it on the screen, why don't I just go ahead and read it? There are a number of things that were said in this interview that I've added to my spreadsheets. So there were some interesting things that were said. I think some really, really interesting things. And I'm excited to see what else she might say in the future. Okay, so toward the beginning, Sheri Dew says, and I'm wondering if you could just tell us what it felt like when you and President Oaks received the word that President Russell M. Nelson had slipped through the veil. And then I'm skipping down a little bit, and Sister Oaks says, so when the prophet did pass away, my husband and I had very different reactions, and that's what was so interesting. He'd been such a devout counselor. In fact, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland told me that he'd never seen anyone that was so loyal or supportive, and he just loved the prophet. But he hadn't felt the weight of responsibility. And it is real. It is tangible. And I saw it fall on him, but I had a different reaction. Sheri Dew says, tell us, Sister Oaks, I was so sorry for his passing, but in my heart, I just felt this joy for him. He led this magnificent life and he made it, and it was wonderful. And we should all aspire we should all aspire to that. I said, he's okay, honey, he's fine. And he still carries that weight. He sees all the things that he should do. So this is really interesting to me. I don't know about you, but I'm sure we've all done this. We've imagined what would it be like if you were called to the 70? What would it be like if you were called to be an apostle? I've gone through that exercise. I imagine it with everything. What would happen if I became president of the United States? What if I did this? What if I did that? And, they've told us what it's like, for, like an apostle. They tell us how it's a surprise and it's a really heavy calling and a very serious responsibility. But becoming an apostle already by itself it's very rare. Um, and it's really high up in the church. And you have regular interaction with the other apostles, the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, as well as the first presidency. And these are long-term callings. So as you work your way up, you start out as the junior apostle. As you work your way up, you gain years of experience. And then once you become a member of the first presidency, at that point, you're already a senior. Well, you're most likely a senior apostle, not the senior apostle, but a senior apostle, below the senior apostle. And I would think, okay, if you make it to first presidency, then you probably have like all the weight that you could experience, even if you're just one of the counselors. You know, I've never served in a bishopric, and that prospect terrifies me because I wouldn't know what to do. It'd probably be easier if you were a counselor first before becoming bishop, because you're very involved with the bishop in supporting him. But by the time that you're in the first presidency, I would have thought that you wouldn't really feel a shift in the weight of responsibility like what she's talking about. But I guess so. And I guess it's not too surprising. We don't just refer to him as president of the church, we also refer to him as the prophet. That's what he is. He is the Lord's spokesperson on the earth. They're all prophets and seers and revelators, but he is the prophet. And so here you go. President Oaks, he felt a shift in the weight of responsibility. But there's more. Okay, later on, Sister Oaks says, well, you saw the results of it, referring to President Nelson's presidency. And I think with President Henry B. Eyring, they all loved each other, and you've seen what's happened in the last 7 years. It was magical because they loved and supported each other. I think that's what I've learned from my husband, and that was the shift for him. He worked so hard. When you're supporting someone, it's like you're holding up Moses' arm or Moses' arms. You're not the centerpiece. You're the person to support, and you don't try to be the centerpiece. And here it is. And all of a sudden, the weight of other, he realized that President Nelson was carrying, it was transferred. And I think it was a bit startling. And I felt actually something fall on me too. And I don't know, or I don't want to call it a reverence, but a solemnity. Sheri Dew says, that's a beautiful word. And then Sister Oak says, and I felt like I had to treat so many things so differently. I saw a lot of things differently, and that surprised me. Yeah, it surprises me too. I would think that you would already be at that point once your husband becomes an apostle. And definitely by the time he's in the first presidency. But that's why I like this stuff, because it gives you an insight into what it's actually like. My thoughts on it were wrong. Now, everyone's an individual, but Sister Nelson spoke in a similar way. Okay, so I've added that to my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z. This is currently row 355. It's a new row, a new topic for mantle. So if you have any other good mantle quotes or anything, feel free to send it my way. I would love to add it to my spreadsheet. Okay. I like collecting these quotes, even if they're not specifically about the second coming, because I may use them later on, either on this channel or as I'm talking about the prophet in maybe a sacrament talk or something like that, or if my children have questions. So I would encourage you to do something similar. Save your favorite quotes, save lots of quotes on lots of different topics so that you can draw on those later in life. Okay, skipping down, Sheri Dew asks, here's the unfair question. If he had 3 words to describe him, which is the unfair part because it probably is dozens and dozens of words, but if you had to pick 3 that you think define your husband, what would they be? Sister Oaks. The first one, wise. He is so wise. He's careful about what he says, what he doesn't say. He's wise. It's a gift, and he sees danger from afar. Okay. That's a really interesting insight in that she would specifically say that he sees danger from afar. It's no secret. I think a lot of people feel this. For those that really believe that he's a prophet called of God, that he has a divine mission to perform as president of the church, that he's probably been brought in at a time when there's going to be danger because he has this legal background. The next few years are probably going to be really interesting because of that. And then I don't mean to repeat it too much, but he called President Christopherson to be one of his counselors, and he also has a legal background. So if he sees danger from afar, according to Sister Oaks, then we might be right about his selection of President Christopherson. And it makes me think, it actually makes me think. Let me go to my spreadsheet called quotes A through Z. Let's see. This is a quote that I've read a million times. It's actually from Sheri Dew. This was a BYU Hawaii devotional, November 2nd, 2022. And the name of the talk is Prophets Can See Around Corners. I'm not going to read the whole story, but it starts out 2 years ago. I saw President Russell M. Nelson see something I could not see. And then she tells the story of the hashtag Give Thanks campaign and the video that they recorded for that year. It was released on November 20th of 2020. It was that really big year where a lot of crazy things happened. And they pitched President Nelson the idea. He's like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's think about it. And then overnight, he received like very specific revelation about that message, how long the message should be, what time it should be published, the day, and all these things went against the conventional wisdom of the social media people, as far as like trying to reach the most number of people that you can, the largest audience. So he received very specific, very, very specific, what you might think is trivial details about this message. And Sheri Dew says, the results, unprecedented. The video's reach dwarfed anything the church had ever released, especially to those not of our faith. Never in the history of the earth had so many people heard a prophet's voice. Prophets see around corners. So again, I wonder, what does President Oaks see right now? And, why is she bringing this up? Is it just part of his character? He always sees danger from afar, or is this based on recent conversations? Okay, let's move on. Have another quote or another part of the transcript I want to read. Sheri Dew says, so here he is, this young university president, and he always projected wisdom for sure. And when he's at the pulpit, he's just telling you point by point, and you can follow it, and it's important. But one of the things that I've always thought you can't always see at the pulpit is this incredible sense of humor and warmth. You look at his pictures when and he's, and he has this incredible warmth in his smile. And I've had the privilege of being around him enough to have experienced a fabulous sense of humor. Can you shed some light on that aspect of him, Sister Oaks? When you said that, Emma Lou Thane said she loved to hear him laugh because it was right from his belly. He would just laugh. When we get together as a family, it's mostly when he's just very quick. He's very funny. I could, and I, and could I, okay, and could I say anything specific? No, but he loves to laugh and he loves. If we think something is funny, he joins right in. He's a happy person. He was in news. Okay, now this is the part that I really want to share right here. He was in New Zealand giving a talk at the very beginning of being an apostle. And he got up and he's very entertaining, my husband. When he sat down, after everyone was laughing hysterically, the Spirit said, "Never do that again." And so you see my husband, he is so serious and so directed he is so serious and so directed, but he feels like he was given that instruction. I think that's really interesting. Because I think in general, this has to do with humor, and there's a time and place for it. I've always been curious about the phrase loud laughter. And the way that I've always thought about it is that it's basically when you have inappropriate laughter. Maybe in this case, it was inappropriate for his position and for the circumstances. Maybe that kind of humor. I doubt that it was anything bad, but when you have this mantle, in this case, he was an apostle, a newly called apostle. You have to be more serious, and I don't think that means that you can't joke around, but people are looking up to you, and they have to be able to take you seriously. And if you're always joking around, then you're probably not going to be taken serious. And this is, the most serious of priesthood offices is apostle. And then even more so when you're called into the first presidency, and even more so when you're president of the church. So it makes sense. And then so there's like certain times, and then there's certain things that you probably just shouldn't joke about at all. The subject matter itself is inappropriate, and that would constitute loud laughter. And honestly, I can't stand it. I'm not saying that there's probably times that I shouldn't joke about things. I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but there's definitely certain topics and things that people joke about, and it's just very off-putting. Usually when it's, potty humor, it's stuff that comes from the gutters of your mind. I really don't like that stuff. Potty humor, sex humor. But in more so, again, more so when it's just really crude, like you're really getting into the gutters of your mind. So anyway, I saved this to my spreadsheet, and I thought I already had this topic on my spreadsheet, but I have this saved under humor. Okay, and then let's move on. Okay, later on in the interview, Sister Oak says he's been very specific about doctrine. And I think if people really spent time with him, they would be amazed. They would befriend him, and they would run to him for help. That's interesting. I wonder what she means by that exactly. But she says he's been very specific about doctrine. And I'm not going to read it right now, but Sister Wendy Nelson said something similar about President Nelson, that he, especially since becoming president of the church, he's been clearer about doctrine. A little bit later on, that he always, that he always tries to do. Okay, that he always tries to do what's right. He doesn't he doesn't ever cut a corner. And I don't know, he doesn't take perks. He's really judicious. He thinks through it and he really loves people. And he never says anything that he doesn't think Heavenly Father has inspired him to say. I have that highlighted. He never says anything that he doesn't think Heavenly Father has inspired him to say. I like these little details and these assurances from the wives of these prophets because it gives us an insight into their character. And when they say something, they mean it. We've talked about this a million times with President Nelson. Some of the things that have been said about him by Sister Nelson and others is that he's not given to hyperbole. He means what he says. He chooses his words carefully, and it seems like it's the same with President Oaks. Uh, and this is the perfect way to say it. He's really judicious. He thinks through it. He never says anything that he doesn't think Heavenly Father has inspired him to say. I think that this is something that we really need to internalize and understand um, when we listen to the prophets speak. It's never just like, oh, I think this is a good idea, or let's try this today. It's not, you know, it's not just like flapping in the wind. It's thought through and it's inspired. Okay, that may be the last one that I have to share. I did want to share a couple other things. So, what we've read, I've added it to what's currently row 126 for Down H Oaks. I wanted to read something else that was said recently about President Oaks, this time by President Henry B. Eyring. This was from October 16th of this year, a YouTube video by Church Newsroom. New First Presidency discusses key issues and shares hope for the world. President Eyring. I watched it. Well, I'll read the question. So Jane Clayson Johnson asks, President Eyring, at the announcement of this new First Presidency, you said that you have seen the power of God come upon President Oaks. Could you speak more about that? And in your initial conversations, what has it been like to counsel with this new prophet? And President Eyring responds, I watched him, and suddenly it was a different man. Suddenly, it was clear that he was receiving revelation of exactly what to do in a very extremely quick, short time. And I really had the feeling this is not the same man I was with a day or two ago. It's another man. There was a kind of quiet, clear knowing exactly what to do. And it was, to me, a spiritual experience. Okay, let's see. I want to read something from Sister Nelson about President Nelson. It's also from a Church News podcast, episode 67. Sister Nelson on being an eyewitness to President Nelson's 4 years as prophet, January 25th, 2022. So this whole thing with President Oaks knowing exactly what to do in a short amount of time. Look at this. Okay, Sister Nelson. Absolutely, right off the top, of course, he has been wrestling with difficult decisions. Can you imagine what he and the other brethren have been through to bring forth these over 90 adjustments and corrections that the Lord wanted to have happen? So he's wrestling with difficult decisions all the time. I never know what the decisions are until after everybody else knows. The wife is indeed the last to know. But I love it when President Nelson says, I'm on call with the Lord 24 hours a day. I wonder what that's like. And then receiving inspiration, revelation, in the moment and quickly. Continuing, and then I love it when he does the necessary work to receive the instruction from the Lord on whatever topic it is. But I love when sometimes he will say, "The Lord showed me exactly." And there it is right there. You know, there it is right there. President Eyring just said, that he's suddenly a different man, and it was clear that he was receiving revelation of exactly what to do in a very extremely quick, short time. And then he reiterates it later. There was a kind of quiet, clear knowing exactly what to do. Let's go back to Sister Nelson. Now, again, I don't know what the issue was or is when my husband wrestles, nor when he says, "The Lord showed me exactly." But the rest of the sentence for my husband sometimes is then, "The Lord showed me exactly how to proceed. The Lord showed me exactly what to do or say. The Lord showed me exactly what would happen if a certain course were followed." Yeah, just a little bit more. So again, I never know what the Lord has instructed him to do, but I love to hear him say those words. And my husband is really quick to respond to the Lord's instructions. For example, when people thank President Nelson for an adjustment and policy or procedure that has just blessed their lives immensely, he will turn to me after they walk away and say, "I was only following instructions from the Lord. I do know how to follow instructions." So, anyway, we have our first little bits of information from Sister Oaks about President Oaks and what it's been like, um, the shift of responsibility, the shifting of the mantle, how it has brought surprises. Um, there are people that have noticed a change in him. There's just this instant change. And it's very clear that he really is a prophet. And then there's just this little hint right here about him seeing danger from afar. It makes me think that that's the reason why she said that, is because they've been talking about it. I don't know if it's just been their whole married life or in the context of him being an apostle or more recently. But again, I feel like just the fact that he called President Christopherson to be one of his counselors, I feel like that indicates that he sees danger from afar. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens, document it, talk about it, support the prophet in his prophetic priorities, and do our part to hold his arms up. He is now the Moses, and we need to help him. I think it was Elder Razban that actually, he gave a talk about supporting the prophet, and he used that imagery of holding Moses' arms up. So, all right, well, that's going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you guys later.